I think this was always going to spell trouble the moment they signed Füllkrug as a backup striker to Sebastian Haller. There's now reports out there that Terzic is unhappy with his performances, doesn't rate him very well. His playing time has dropped. I think that, or we both said this on the show, it's always been kind of difficult to see where his place in this team is going to be, because he's not exactly an imposing center forward, and they tend to think that that's what they need. Although anyone who listen to the main show this week also realizes that we don't actually know what they need and what Terzic's actual setup is going to be looking like. But I know that when there was talk about another center forward coming to Dortmund, and it ended up Niklas Füllkrug, right? That there was some last minute conversations between Youssoufa Moukoko and another club. That club was RB Leipzig. So that gives you some indication that he felt unhappy with where he was, with the amount of trust that was given to him. I think also, and I think this is really fascinating, Stefan, I'm curious to see how you feel about this. But Borussia Dortmund spent the greater half of last year or last season signing this kid to a new long-term deal. And they invested a significant amount of resources signing Moukoko to this deal. They paid him a significant amount of money to commit. And 6 months later, it feels like we're at the point now where this commitment is very much in doubt by both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a bizarre kind of quick turnaround. There's a lot about Moukoko's situation at Dortmund that doesn't really make a lot of sense to me right now. As you said, he was promoted from the youth teams with remarkable buzz surrounding him. It felt like Dortmund couldn't have waited to get him into the first team. And as you said, last season, he had a really good kind of run of games. The first half of the season, obviously picked up an injury in the second half, which maybe derailed, his kind of hopes of kind of cementing a first team spot. But it definitely feels like perhaps over the kind of summer period that, I am purely speculating here, but it feels like almost like the relationship between Moukoko and Terzic just completely deteriorated. Not quite to the extent that, he's been left out of the cold or anything, or he's been relegated to the reserves or something like that. But you only have to kind of look at his minutes in the Bundesliga this season, where, he had 31 minutes in day one, 9 minutes the second match day, 1 minute in the third, 6 minutes against Freiburg, and he didn't feature at all against Wolfsburg. And the kind of baffling thing about it, that is that in each and almost every single one of these games, except maybe the Freiburg game, Dortmund were desperate for goals. They're very tight matches. And, I wrote earlier in the season, we're still early in the season, but I wrote a week or two ago, in fact, it was last week's newsletter, about how, things just were not working with Sebastian Haller. He wasn't mobile enough. He wasn't linking up with the players enough. He wasn't getting on the ball in the box enough. And because Edin Terzic is clearly a subscriber to the Gegenpressing newsletter, he changed that and brought in Füllkrug against Wolfsburg. And as I said on the main show, I actually thought Füllkrug did a decent enough job of linking up with the players. Felt like a more structured attacking line. But the intriguing thing is that all of this is just completely passed Moukoko by, and he's completely overlooked as an option to start games at all, really, which is just so fascinating, because actually, if you kind of go back to last season, when obviously Haller had that unfortunate, illness where he was out for the first half of the season, it was Moukoko who had to really fill in as Dortmund's kind of first choice number 9, and he did a decent enough job of it. I've got the stats open in front of me now. I think he had 6 goals and maybe 4 assists in his first 15 or 16 league games last season, which is absolutely fine for a player of that age, of a player who's just been thrown in. And at that point, and as we kind of talked about, as in fact there's a video on the YouTube channel, I think that you can still go and find, where we talk about Moukoko's future back then. he kind of proved that he could be a good goal scorer for Dortmund, and there's a lot of speculation as to whether he felt he was already too good for Dortmund, whether he was going to move on, and he signs on his new contract. I don't understand why things hadn't moved on from that point. You would think after the way that he filled in for the team last year, and the way that the club spent so much time and effort tying him up to a new contract, what has since happened has kind of led to Terzic just deciding to completely disregard him. And the only thing I can really think of is that the manner in which Haller came back into the team also kind of coincided with Moukoko's injury in February. And then obviously Dortmund just kind of locked in that front three, didn't they, of Moukoko, Malin, Adeyemi and Haller. And obviously Terzic was determined to stick with that system. And so much so that, towards the end of the summer transfer window, he obviously put pressure on the club to sign another target man in the same sort of foil as Haller, which is obviously why they picked up Füllkrug rather. And it just kind of feels like Terzic just has no interest in finding a way to play Moukoko in this team. He said he's obviously decided he's a different profile of striker. He can't replace Haller when Haller isn't playing well, so we had to go sign Füllkrug. And there's just it just feels like there's no compatibility there, which is so bizarre to me because you mentioned Leipzig there, and we talked about this on a few shows recently, and the comparison between Leipzig and Dortmund right now. The ease with which Marco Rose is able to bring players in and out of his team, the way that he can swap a guy like Poulsen for Timo Werner, for Benjamin Sesko, for Dani Olmo, any of these players can kind of come in and out, even though they're all different profiles, different shapes, different sizes, different attributes. It's a very fluid and very seamless manner in which Leipzig can juggle all these balls. But if you allow me to mix my sporting metaphors for a moment, but for some reason, the idea of Moukoko slotting in for Sebastian Haller to Dortmund, to Edin Terzic's mind, seems like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, which I guess is where these rumours are now coming from, as to Dortmund now looking to move him on.
Yeah, I think there's a lot here to unpack. I think there is a player who has a little bit of impatience. You have to remember Moukoko only turned 18 in January, right? Actually, sorry, let me correct that. In November.
Yeah, he's 19. He's 19 in November, yeah.
November, yes. And that was also one of the reasons why it took so long for him to essentially, sign that new contract, because they had to wait until he was 18, and then of course there was the World Cup. He was part of the World Cup squad. There's a lot of background stuff, of course, going on with Moukoko as well. I think anyone who wants to, of course, his agent and his family and history and all that, I think that's all well documented. So I think there was these things that took place. And then, of course, Haller comes back. But right around that time when Haller comes back, he ruptures his syndesmotic ligament. And so he's out for quite some time with that, right? And it really is only used sporadically towards Dortmund's run to a failed title, or only comes off the bench, including in that 2-2 draw against Mainz. And it hasn't really changed since. But at the same time, we're talking about a player who's still only 18, right? And I think that is where his impatience comes in. And he, of course, is considered the messiah of the Dortmund team, right? There hasn't been as much hype about a young player coming out of the academy since Lars Ricken, which, if you know Lars Ricken and the hype that he had around in the 1990s, tells you everything you need to know how big of a deal this is. I mean, maybe Mario Götze is the only other one, right? The amount of buzz that he's generated around the national team as well, our country struggling for number 9, right? And yes, he doesn't have the physical profile, but I have to remind you that he has exactly the same physical profile as a certain Louis Openda who plays for Leipzig, right? So, that shouldn't be a hindrance. But I actually almost wonder there if it's just two parties involved that do not have enough patience in development. And they have made a commitment until 2026. And, this constant bickering and fighting over playing time, over where the player sees his development, where the club sees the players' development, the coach sees the players' development, because I'm pretty sure the coaching staff and the sporting directors differ here as well. It makes for a lot of drama, and it makes for drama that I think Dortmund can't really afford. And I almost wonder if they're at a point, and this, I have to remind you, worked really well with Nuri Sahin, where you just loan him out for a season, or half a season even. Just send him to somewhere, I don't know, send him to the Netherlands, or send him to Hoffenheim, or one of those clubs. I'm purely speculating here, Stefan, but where maybe like just taking a break might be the best option.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense in regard to why, there seems to be a kind of breakdown in communication here, or because if you look at it from Moukoko's point of view, he's obviously been built up as this, the star of tomorrow at Dortmund. There's been a lot of talk about him, being the next kind of big Dortmund star. And since he's been promoted from the youth team, Dortmund have spent, 50 million euros on 2 strikers and 2 number 9s, So you can understand where his camp might be coming from, where they say, the reason he's at Dortmund is because you're supposed to have this reputation for, streamlining the process of young players getting game time in the club. And the opposite's happened here, where, not only have you signed a top class number 9 in Sebastian Haller, who only would have joined the club under the assumption that he'll be started every week, but you've also then signed a German international to kind of rival him for game time this season. And, with all due respect to Moukoko, he is third choice in that team, whichever way you kind of look at it. So you can understand why his camp might be saying, this isn't exactly what we were promised when we signed this contract extension, or even when we agreed to stay at the club last year, or because this is what happens at clubs. The clubs do sit down with these young players and have these kind of 5-year plans for them and say, you'll be playing this amount of football at this point, blah, blah, blah. So, you can understand why Moukoko's maybe quite upset by that and wanting more game time. I think the only thing that still kind of is up in the air is really what Moukoko's potential is here, or what his ceiling is as a player. We've seen moments of, really good football from him. He's shown moments of how quick he can be in the box and how good he is in tight spaces, and obviously has a clear eye for goal. But when I read these reports that, he might leave Dortmund because the likes of Real Madrid or Liverpool or Man United want to sign him, I don't really know where that's coming from, except for maybe the fact that he was obviously on their radar a couple of years ago, because I do wonder why a Real Madrid would look at a player who can't get game time for Dortmund and spend money on him just now, unless, of course, they're just hoovering up young players in the hope that some of them might pick off, which is, of course, what Real Madrid try and kind of do anyway. So there's that potential, but it would seem like an odd move from Dortmund to sell a young player who's not getting game time, who hasn't realised his potential at the club, to a bigger club in Real Madrid or Liverpool, for example. So, as you said, the Leipzig link perhaps is the one that makes the most sense, because, they might be willing to take a chance on him that Dortmund maybe can't offer him, and offer him game time that Dortmund can't offer. But I don't know. I'm still very unclear as to, why he's not getting game time at Dortmund, and if they were to sell him, who would actually want to buy him?
Yeah, he's now with Wasserman. Wasserman is the huge American agency that represents a lot of players, in particular in MLS, but increasingly also in Europe. They have another Dortmund player under contract named Gio Reyna. But I don't want to open that can of worms in this show, because I think we'd be spending the rest of the show just talking about Borussia Dortmund.
Maybe Real Madrid can do a 2-for-1 offer and pick up both of them in the summer.
It's not surprising that those 2 players have been linked to Real Madrid. Let's say it that way. Of course, they have a player at Real Madrid in Federico Valverde. So maybe that's where the link comes from. But yes, anyways.